We're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 12. 1 Kings chapter 12. You remember God's prophecy that we looked at last week, that the kingdom was going to be taken away from Solomon's family, not during Solomon's lifetime, for David's sake. He would leave Solomon on the throne until he died, but he would take away from his son, from his heir, 10 of the tribes. Then we find out that the individual who's going to receive those 10 tribes is a guy named Jeroboam, who is living in exile down in Egypt. So all of these things have been prophesied. Is there any hope that things might turn out differently? Now, my immediate response is always, no, God has spoken, that's the end of it. But I'm reminded of Jonah. You remember the story of Jonah past the big fish, right? He gets spit back up. He's told the second time, arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against her, for her wickedness has come up before me. Jonah finally goes to Nineveh. He preaches. The king and everybody in the kingdom repents in sackcloth and ashes. God reverses his decision to destroy Nineveh, at least at that time. And it makes Jonah mad, because Jonah had crawled up on the side of the hill to watch the fireworks and watch God wipe them out. And then God decides not to wipe them out. Jonah's take on it is, I knew before I came that you're a God of mercy and that you were going to forgive these people and be nice to them. So there's at least some evidence that there were times that God said, I'm going to get rid of them, and then changed his mind. Unfortunately, this is not going to be one of those times. Now let's start reading in 1 Kings 12 and verse 1. 12:1. This is right after Solomon has died. And so Rehoboam, his son, went to Shechem, for all of Israel had gone there to make him the king. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon. He returned from Egypt. So they sent for Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. This is really an interesting political picture. Jeroboam comes back up from Egypt when he finds out that Solomon is dead, but he doesn't necessarily come to just take over 10 tribes. It's been prophesied to him. He knows that those 10 tribes are his, but he comes up and he goes with the nation of Israel as kind of an ambassador, a royal go-between, to talk to Rehoboam about the problems that Solomon's kingdom had caused the people, and that maybe they could work something out. If you will take down a notch, take back some of the things that Solomon had put on us, then we'll serve you. So it's an offer for Jeroboam to come out of seclusion and to actually be part of the kingdom and have a helping hand rather than a harmful hand. The harsh labor and heavy yoke that they mention, I think, equals mainly high taxes and forced labor. Solomon did some tremendous building during his kingdom. Name a couple of things that Solomon built. What do you know that he built? The temple. The temple was extravagant and expensive. David had started on the project prior to his death, but Solomon was in charge of most of the building of the temple. So that was expensive. What about his wives' temples? He built a bunch more shrines. Those things must have been expensive. He had 1,000 women. That's expensive. You know, if just half of them went to Walmart, that's a lot of money just to take care of your wives. So he's taking care of them. He also was into horses. Has anybody ever heard about the stables that Solomon built? He had tons and tons of horses and very extravagant stables. His residence was very nice. Right? So who paid for that? It wasn't Solomon. So Solomon is taxing the people heavily, and he is using forced labor to get done what he needs to get done in his kingdom. So when Jeroboam gets to town, he and the delegation just say, if you will, lower taxes, be nice to us, work with us instead of against us, we'll serve you. We'll all be one big happy kingdom. So he is going to take it into consideration. Now, I'm going to get on a soapbox here in a minute, and just be patient with me, because it's something that has bothered me the last several years in particular. But here we go. Rehoboam answered, go away for 3 days, and then come back to me. So the people went away. King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. How would you advise me to answer these people? He asked. They replied, if today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. But Rehoboam rejected the advice of the elders and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and who were serving him. He asked them, what's your advice? How should we answer these people who say to me, lighten the yoke your father put on us? The young men who had grown up with him replied, these people have said to you, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter. Now you tell them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I'll make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam as the king had said, and come back to me in 3 days. And the king answered the people harshly, rejecting the advice given to him by the elders. Okay. Rehoboam asked 2 very different groups for their advice. Right? He started out with the guys who had worked with his father. Now, from a couple of angles, they were good people to ask. Right? They were already in the cabinet, so to speak. They knew the ins and outs of the current government. They were friends of Solomon's, or at least contemporaries of Solomon's, and they had an opinion. Solomon's dead, so now they can say whatever it is they need to say. Things that maybe they wouldn't have said while Solomon was still alive. Maybe they were yes men for Solomon, but Solomon's gone. So when his son says, what should I do? They say, you need to listen to the people. You need to allow them to guide you a little bit as you're governing them, and in that way you'll have a good relationship and they'll follow you. He didn't like that advice. Okay? It's pretty solid state. That's good advice. I don't care who you are. So he goes and he asks his friends, the guys he grew up with, guys who were not in government, guys who were not in the cabinet, guys who did not know the lay of the land, guys whose only relationship with Solomon was for Solomon to tell them what to do, and they did it. But now they see the opportunity to be in charge. And if we're going to be in charge and our generation is going to be doing all of these things that the older guys used to do, we'll just move them aside, and now it'll be ours, and we can have even more of a lavish lifestyle than they ever thought about having. So what we want you to do is we want you to tell him or tell the people that they hadn't seen anything yet, that it's going to get worse, not better, and that they better get in line because you're going to be a tough guy in your governance. Who did he not ask? He didn't ask God. Did you notice that part? This is where the soapbox comes in. So if you want to sleep through soapboxes, just catch a nap. This is important to me. In the last 20 or 30 years, I don't know how many times I have heard elderships, leaderships, different congregations, and not just in churches of Christ, but in denominational groups as well, use the phrase, after much consideration we have decided. I've even heard them say, after much prayer and consideration we have decided. What they mean is the people we like the most said, and we're going with that. And so you have all kinds of things coming into churches that never would have imagined doing them. And they're willing to allow people to be unhappy so that they can show their authority. I'll give you one example. Several years ago in northwest Oklahoma, there was a congregation that hired a new preacher. The new preacher came in and he said, we're going to change things. We're going to be doing things this way, this way, this way, this way, and this way. And if that doesn't suit you, if that's not something that you can live with, then you can vote with your feet. You ever heard somebody say that before? Vote with your feet. I thought, as a minister, I cannot imagine in my wildest dreams saying that to a congregation of people, right? You're God's people and I love you, so, if you don't want to do what I want to do, take off. Vote with your feet. And many of them did, by the way. Lots of them left. And that's basically what Rehoboam is saying to them. You're going to do what I tell you to do, whether you like it or not. My dad was bad, but just hang in there because it's going to get worse. What happens as a result? Exactly what was prophesied happens as a result. So there's no way to save the kingdom at this point because he has listened to the wrong set of advisors. I wonder what God would have told him if he had thought to ask. Would God have given him the right advice and saved the kingdom? Would God have given him the wrong advice or just said, go do whatever you want to do and let the kingdom fall apart? We don't know. We do know that he never seems to have asked God's opinion on the matter. He listened to his friends and those with whom he wanted to curry favor. Right? Look down at verse 15. So the king did not listen to the people, for this turn of events was from the Lord, to fulfill the word the Lord had spoken to Jeroboam, son of Nebat, through Ahijah the Shilonite. When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, what share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David. So the Israelites went home. But as for the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah, Rehoboam still ruled over them. So as we talked about already, we have Judah that remains faithful in the south to Rehoboam, and then the other 10 go in the north. We have Benjamin that stays connected to Judah in the south. The terrible thing here, and we'll look at it in a second, is that Jeroboam is not really God's man. Right? David was God's man. Solomon seems to have been for a while and then tapered off. But we're not going to have a king in Judah or Israel that's just an outstanding follower of God. It becomes more political than religious, but religion plays a part. Look at verse 25, 12:25. Oh, wait. I wanted to note something just in the text that's kind of interesting. Verse 18, King Rehoboam sent out Adoniram, who was in charge of forced labor. Right? So Solomon had a guy in charge of making you do what he wanted you to do. But all of Israel stoned him to death. King Rehoboam, however, managed to get into his chariot and escape to Jerusalem. So he took his muscle with him and said, you guys are coming back to work for me. They killed his ambassador and he escaped back to Jerusalem. But look at verse 19. Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. Right? There was a time when this was written, right? So whoever wrote this is just reflecting on the situation as it was when they wrote. But like I said, you never really have another time when all 12 tribes are truly united. We talked about this morning Jesus going to Samaria and how they had intermarried with the Assyrians. And it's just there's never really that full 12 tribe unit as there was under David.
Didn't God tell them that that's what would happen when they were clamoring for a king, and he didn't want to have a king if they kept clamoring if they wanted a king?
Yep. He'll take your sons and put them in the army. He'll take your daughters for his wives and servants. He'll tax you. Everything Solomon did was exactly what God had said was going to happen. He was the poster child for that prophecy. He really was. Look at verse 25. Here's what Jeroboam does. Right? If you're a new king, you've got 10/12, you've got 5/6 of the nation that once was the nation of Israel at your disposal, and you don't want them to go play with the neighbor children. Here's what you do. Jeroboam fortified Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and he lived there. And from there he went out and built up Peniel. So he fortifies. Then Jeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, they will again give their allegiance to their Lord, meaning Solomon's son. They'll go back to Rehoboam if I let them go down there to worship. So, they will kill me and return to King Rehoboam. After seeking advice, from whom did he seek advice? Right? The ones he wanted, the ones he liked, the ones he wanted to hear. Does it say in here, and Jeroboam called God and said, God, what do you think? No. After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, it is too much for you to go to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. That's a direct quote, by the way. Who is he quoting? He's quoting Aaron, right? Moses is up on the mountain getting the law. Aaron's in the valley making a golden calf. Why did Aaron make a golden calf? Why did Jeroboam make a golden calf? Well, they just came out of Egypt, right? When you're in Egypt, golden calves make sense. So you come up out of Egypt, you're in the desert. What people are used to is a golden calf. I think Jeroboam is jumping over the kingdom years and going back to Egypt because he just came out of Egypt. Why don't we honor those guys? We'll just honor Egypt. And so he decides that they're going to have golden calves as their gods. And then he says the same thing Aaron said. Here's the God who brought you up out of Egypt. One he set up at Bethel. The other he set up in Dan. That's pretty much his borders to the north and south. Dan is up north. Bethel is down to the south. What does Bethel mean? Anybody? Jacob is on his way to Padan Aram. While he is on his way to Padan Aram, he sleeps in this place, and there is a stairway to heaven, angels ascending and descending from the throne of God. He wakes up and he says, God must be in this place. And so he named the place Bethel. This is the house of God. They set up an idol-worshiping golden calf shrine in Bethel, the house of the Lord. So I've got no sympathy for Jeroboam at all. This thing became a sin. The people came to worship the one at Bethel and went as far as Dan to worship the other. So as long as they stayed inside their territorial boundaries, Jeroboam was fine with them worshiping idols. Keep going. Jeroboam built shrines on high places and appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levites. Why doesn't he have enough Levites? They're at the temple in Jerusalem, right? So all the trained priests are somewhere else. So he just appoints his own. So God said the tribe of Levi will be my priests. He says, I'll just make some golden calves, and then we'll appoint priests from whoever we want to appoint them from. He instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the festival held in Judah. And he offered sacrifices on the altar. This he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he had made. And at Bethel, he also installed priests at the high places he had made. On the 15th day of the 8th month, a month of his own choosing, he offered sacrifices on the altar he had built at Bethel. So he instituted the festival for the Israelites and went up to the altar to make offerings. So you could just line up all the stuff that's wrong with what Jeroboam's doing here. A, he's made false gods for the people. B, he has appointed priests that are not true priests. They're not from Levite. And now he is serving at the altar as if he was a priest. If you really want to be in charge of the country, name yourself the chief officer of the church. Right? Catholic Church won't give me a divorce, so I'll just name myself the head of the Church of England, and now I'm in charge, and you can't tell me what to do, and I said it's okay, so it must be okay. Right? So that's exactly what Jeroboam does. He pronounces himself to be the head of the church, so to speak. He makes himself into a priest, and he sets up a festival day. Now, the 8th month and the 15th day is actually one of the big 3 festivals for the Israelite people, according to the law. It is Sukkot, S-U-K-K-O-T, Sukkot, or the Feast of the Booths. It's kind of a festival of harvest, but it's also meant to celebrate the 40 years in the desert. And they'll still do it, some will. Worked in North Dallas. I don't remember why I was there, maybe doing some air conditioner work or something. And as we were driving down through Highland Park, there are some Orthodox Jews who live in that area, and outside their homes would be lean-tos that had been covered over with brush and whatever. And it was during the time of Sukkot. You would supposedly, I don't know whether they did or not, but sleep outside in these booths to have solidarity with your ancestors who came up out of Egypt and had to sleep in tents out in the desert. Okay? 8th month, 15th day. So Jeroboam says, if I don't do something, they're going to go build their lean-tos in Jerusalem, and they're going to remember the Israelites, and they're going to remember the tribe of Levi, and they're going to remember God's anointed, and I'm going to be in trouble. So he makes the golden calves, and he has his people worship there and there alone. Now, those of you that were in class this morning, in John chapter 4, Jesus runs into a woman of Samaria. Right? Samaria was in the northern, in fact, it was the capital city of Israel for a while in the north. While she's talking to Jesus, what's the big question? You Jews say we have to go to Jerusalem to worship, but we say we can worship here on this mountain. Now that's a lot of generations gone by, but northern Israel, the place of Samaria, the old capital city of Samaria, they're still asking that same question. They're saying, do you think that we really have to go down there to worship? Who started that? Jeroboam did. Right? Keep them from going to Jerusalem, because if you keep them from going to Jerusalem, you get to keep your kingdom. If they ever get a whiff of going back home, you're going to lose them. So he sets up false gods and false prophets to make sure that he doesn't lose the nation that the one true God gave him. Now, if that doesn't beat all, I mean, that's nuts, that's the way you decide you're going to keep your kingdom. Question, does it work? Absolutely. It works. So what must God feel like when he provides us with such wonderful blessings? He has given this guy a kingdom on a silver platter. And the first thing the guy does is dishonor God by building a bunch of idols and telling his people, don't go to Jerusalem, which was the choice of God for his place. But that's what happened. Right? So, and it's not going to get better in a hurry. There's not suddenly going to be a reconciliation. There's not suddenly going to be a triumphal return to the Lord. There are going to be years and years and years of worshiping false gods in the north. The south will come and go. There'll be times that they're worshiping Jehovah, and there'll be times that they're worshiping Baal and Asherah or some other foreign god. But as of this period of time, the two will never really be reunited. When you say Israel, you're not talking about all of Israel, you're talking about the north, the 10 tribes. And the worship of the one true God and the worship at the temple of the one true God is going to be at risk, and at times the temple will be used for anything and everything except the worship of the one true God. So we'll see a lot of that as we go through, but this is the dividing line. This is the starting point. Why did it happen? Solomon married foreign wives and built shrines for their gods. And the whole nation fell apart and went into idolatry because of it. How important is leadership? How important is if you're given authority, how important is what you do with that authority? So how much should we be praying for the leadership of this country. What they do in this generation, we may not live to see the outcome, but 100 years from now, if this nation still stands, things that happen today, tomorrow, next week will still be part of the fabric. We need to be praying for these guys all the time. We need to be involved if we can.